move on to the criteria best predicted by personality and some of the controversy associated with personality testing. Mm. Now, where in the previous lecture we covered how task performance is best predicted by cognitive ability tests, what we find is other more interpersonal aspects of performance tend to be predicted better by personality tests. So, for example, organizational citizenship behaviors, the extent to which you help your colleagues and go the extra mile with customers, for example, this is predicted best by conscientiousness and to some extent by agreeableness and openness as well. Now, point 22 class, as a reminder, if you square this, you get 0.04. So about 4% of the variance in these helping behaviors can be explained by conscientiousness. Yeah. Then we have counterproductive workplace behaviors. Conscientiousness predicts lower counterproductive workplace behaviors, which is what you want. Yeah. Teamwork best predicted, interestingly, by agreeableness. Yeah. So agreeableness, having someone who is cooperative, who trusts other people, is important for a well-functioning team. In-role performance is also predicted by personality, yeah, task performance, especially by conscientiousness class. Managerial performance also tends to be predicted by conscientiousness, but now we see extroversion start to emerge. And in fact, extroversion is one of the best predictors of leadership performance. So when selecting leaders, extroversion tends to be used, pardon me, as well. Now, we talked about the bandwidth principle earlier. Class, in research that has looked at, I think this was a hotel recruitment process. Yeah, what they found was if they wanted to see who would be better at small and small clerical tasks and administrative tasks, conscientiousness was predictive, but detail orientedness, a narrower trait, was even more predictive. Yeah, so this very narrow trait predicted this narrower criterion. Another one is handling customer objections. So in this hotel, people who were considerate in particular, yeah, this predicted handling customer objections even better than mere agreeableness. Now, this is not to say that agreeableness did not predict handling customer objections. It was just weaker, class. Yeah, if you want to predict a narrow work criterion, you use a narrow personality trait. Now again, this is not the same thing as in cognitive testing, where IQ is generally predictive across the board. Now, for personality tests class, this is the take home. For narrow criteria, you want a narrow facet as a predictor. Yeah, so conscientiousness is the trait, detail orientedness is the facet. It's kind of like class, it's like a diamond. Yeah, so a diamond, well, this is like a shitty 2D depiction. Yeah, well, there's a reason I teach and don't draw. Well, each face of the diamond is called a facet. Yeah, so the trait is the diamond, but the trait contains various facets. Now, do you use the whole diamond or do you use the facet? It depends on the criterion. If it's a broad criterion like task performance or job performance, use the whole diamond. If it's a narrow criterion like handling administrative tasks, then you want a narrow facet. So, you can go through this in your own time. The textbook has a nice summary list of traits that go well for certain jobs and selection. Notice how conscientiousness shows up again and again. And this conscientiousness is one of the more, more boring personality traits. It's not a very standout thing. But it does predict the criteria we care about, especially performance class. And so that's why it shows up again and again like this. Ultimately, we just have to go back to the science and see what the science tells us, for better or for worse. Now, let's take a look at the big picture class. We'll go through this slide slowly because it's important. There's a lot here. First, personality tests only weakly correlate with other selection tools. Yeah? So the performance of a job candidate on a cognitive ability test might correlate pretty well with how they do on a pardon me, class, it might correlate pretty well with how they do on a work sample. Yeah, so these things might correlate well, and so you might get redundant information. In contrast, a personality test does not correlate with other selection tools. So when you include personality tests as an adjunct to other selection processes, they combine beautifully, class. So cognitive ability tests and personality tests really go well together. They compensate for each other's weaknesses and they capture KSAOs that are genuinely distinct from other selection tools. Now, faking. We will talk more about faking in the next slide, class. But let's get real. Yeah, let's real talk, class. Faking good does happen. People can and do fake on personality tests. But here's the critical thing: it still predicts our criteria. You can so we have people who, yeah, fake being more conscientious than they really are, and yet it still predicts performance, nevertheless, in spite of the faking. You understand? And this is deeply counterintuitive and somewhat unsettling, class, that you would think if people were just horrible fakers, conscientiousness would not predict how people do on the job, because they'd fake here, but then their faking would not translate to actually doing well on the job. But that's not the case. Irrespective of faking, conscientiousness predicts performance. Now, we will unpack this as we proceed. Thirdly, there is minimal adverse impact. Now, you'll remember adverse impact from the lecture on cognitive ability testing, where this is the phenomenon in which people across protected demographic groups, for example, across gender, disability status, LGBT status, etc., etc. Yeah, so people across these categories score differently on the predictor. Yeah, so for example, if your predictor is an interview, is a job interview, and you find that men score higher than women on your job interview, there's something wrong with your job interview. Yeah, it is creating adverse impact, which is a legal liability. Yeah, class, understood? Now, personality tests, for all their faults being fakeable, for example, they have minimal adverse impact. There is very little evidence of systematic group differences in personality test performance. Now, another great thing about personality tests, which I brought up in the previous part, electronic tests are just as valid, class. So there is no risk of undermining the validity of your test by delivering it online, in contrast to cognitive ability tests, which once you put them online, well, all bets are off. Now, if you want to take a personality test and make it more valid, you can add the word at work to it. So if you're filling out a personality questionnaire, for example, and you want to adapt it for work, you can just add the phrase at work. So I, people say I'm reliable and trustworthy at work. Yeah. So this contextualizing of the personality questions has been shown to make it more valid, has been shown to increase the extent to which it predicts your criteria. Now, do job applicants fake good, class? Now, this is a question that might seem difficult to unpack because fakers generally don't admit that they're faking. Yeah? So how do you know people are faking without asking them? You understand? How do you know? So, one way to do this is, and this is typically how this is studied, I think over the past, it's been 30 years, because research on this has been going on since the 90s class. So these are studies that would compare how job applicants performed to people who already have the job, also known as job incumbents. Now, the nice thing about this comparison is that there really isn't altogether much difference between these two groups of people, right? People who are job applicants want the job incumbents have the job, so it's they have kind of similar motivations after similar things, and generally have similar qualifications, etc., etc. The only difference is that these people have an incentive to fake and these people don't. Yeah, that's the difference. They have an incentive to fake, they don't. And what we find is when we compare people who have jobs, incumbents, to people who want jobs, job applicants, we find actually not that big differences. Yeah, people fake, but not that much. And this is a critical point that I teased in week one. Fakers fake mildly. Yes, people want to seem more conscientious than they actually are, but they don't commit to the bit, class. They don't commit hard enough and fake wildly enough to make a difference. It ultimately comes down to the assumptions we make about others. Yeah, when people fake, they try to fake in a way that makes it seem real. Yeah, so they want it to be a legitimate fake that passes muster, that passes a smell test. So people misunderstand how much they need the fake, and so they're like, well, instead of a 2 out of 7, maybe I'll just say I'm a 4. Yeah, whereas people who are naturally agreeable or who actually possess that trait would rate much higher, and they'd also be faking to some extent as well. So because of this phenomenon, faking seems to have minimal impact on criterion validity, which is to say that regardless of faking, personality tests still predict the criteria that matter. Now, will it always be this way? I don't know, class, because once word gets out about how these tests go, then it might not work the same way anymore. Yeah, this might change. Ultimately, class, we're beholden to the science. Once the science tells us that faking is now so bad that there is little evidence of validity regardless of faking, yeah, once the validity of personality tests starts to plummet, then we know, oh crap, we gotta drop these tests. They don't work anymore. Yeah, for now they still do. They definitely still do. Now, there are ways to minimize faking. Yeah? One is building rapport. So, on the occasion that you are working with few job candidates, if you have that luxury, you can build rapport with each candidate to basically, because you have a relationship with them, they will be more likely to be honest. Now, I think while this is in the book, I don't see this as something that's very realistic. The reason being that one of the big advantages of personality testing is that for a big applicant pool, it is cheap. Yeah, it is a cheap way cheap and fast way to get a lot of data that can be scored right away on an applicant pool and then sort them accordingly. Because it is low on price, it runs aground the idea that you would build rapport with the respondents. It just doesn't quite work, class. And so for that reason, I don't really know you can put this to much use, but maybe in specific contexts where you do want to measure personality, but you have the luxury of a smaller applicant pool and more time, more resources, yeah, sure, build rapport. You can say that insincere answers can be detected. Whether or not that is true, you can say it. And saying this has been shown in research to change responses and reduce faking. Yeah, you can also warn of sanctions or punishments if faking is detected. Yeah, so you might say those detected will automatically be eliminated from further consideration on the job. Yeah, these are much more realistic to use in personality testing settings. You can also use subtle questions that are not transparent. I don't know about this directly, but I think Jordan Peterson claims that his measure of the Big Five uses items that are more subtle, less value laden, and so less likely to be kind of faked. Yeah, because it doesn't seem like there's one clear answer or not. Well, that's the claim he makes. And his doctoral student, Colin DeYoung, is a pretty serious personality researcher. So, yeah, maybe it's true. I just don't know firsthand. But that's the claim anyway. Yeah. And lastly, you can include social desirability questions. Yeah, these are questions that detect faking. Now, for example, you might ask a question like, have you ever lied? Have you ever lied in your life? And then give them a choice of yes or no. Now, just about everyone has lied at some point. But people who are faking, they'll say yes because they have lied. But people who are faking will say, no, I've never lied. Look at me, I'm a great future employee, right? So the social desirability questionnaires include some 10 or so questions like this where there is one answer that is socially desirable and one that is realistic. Yeah, so it's realistic that everyone has lied at some point, and yet fakers will say no. There you go. So there are a couple things that can be done to overcome the faking issue. Now let's get to the controversy, class. One of the more recent bits of controversy is Nevada bill. It's an Assembly Bill 132 that was presented to the legislature in Nevada, which is the state in America in which Las Vegas is. Yeah, so in April 2019, they attempted to pass a bill that banned personality tests in selection. Yeah, the bill specifies the wording is to making it unlawful to condition employment on the completion or results of a personality test. Now, uh, I think it was a congresswoman who came up with it. Neil said that this addition to the bill was prompted by a constituent who applied for a retail position stocking shelves, much like in this example over here, class. Simply a shelf stocker, and this person was subjected to a 50-item personality test, specifically in this case an integrity test, which prompted her to add the provision to the bill. This seemed stupid to the job candidate and to the congresswoman. Understandable, yeah. I think most lay people look at personality testing and think, what a load of junk. What a load of rubbish. Yeah? Now, fortunately, the industrial organizational psychologists class and HR professionals in Nevada and around the United States were vehemently critical of this part of the bill, and Neil relented and struck this section from the bill. It was deleted. The remaining bill did get passed and came into effect this year, and the bill in its form now restricts the use of cannabis testing and employment selection. So in Nevada, companies cannot test for the consumption of weed and use that to make employment decisions. They can't even test, let alone use it to make employment decisions. Mm. Now, again, we have this case where a very job candidate was very upset by having to take a personality test and saw it as unfair and rubbish, which is corroborated by well-meaning public intellectuals. Yeah, well-meaning, perhaps not aware of the science, but at least well-meaning. Now, there are also academics who are on the march against this, perhaps misguided, but that's their take at least. There is a lot of controversy, class, in with regard to personality testing. This is a face validity problem. Now, we talked about the various types of validity. There is one additional one that is more superficial, literally speaking. It's called face validity, class. So this is, does the test look like it is valid? Does a personality test look like it matters for job criteria, job performance, teamwork, etc.? Yeah? Now, personality test has horrible face validity. It does not look like it works. In contrast to interviews, which tend to have better face validity. Even structured interviews have better face validity than personality tests. Now, face validity has no bearing on the genuine validity of the test. Yeah? So personality tests can predict performance, can do what they say on the tin, can be consistent regardless of whether or not they look consistent. Or rather, whether they look like they work. Yeah. Now, face validity does not matter for validity, but it does matter for the legitimacy of the selection package to applicants and to outsiders like legislators. Basically, does it look fair? Yeah? And so face validity, class, matters primarily for purposes of the applicant reaction. How do applicants and outsiders react to the selection package? Now, this matters because it can have reputational and, in some cases, legal consequences. Yeah. Now, this is a problem to be managed, but ultimately you still want a test that works, even if it kind of looks like it doesn't. Yeah, this is where we want to listen to the science. So yes, we want a test that is valid, but let's also consider, does this come across as legitimate? Does this come across as fair? Now, there are ways to minimize how controversial personality testing is and to make it seem more fair and just. First, a job analysis should inform what you choose to test. Yeah, if you can ground your thinking in a job analysis, at the very least, it will be more likely to stand up in court. Yeah. Next, personality testing should not stand alone. Yeah. So if you are only using a 50 question personality test to select employees, yeah, you're gonna have a problem. But if it is used as an adjunct to other selection techniques or as part of a broader selection package, then it is more effective, more genuinely valid, but also doesn't look as out of place. And of course, class, choose tests that are valid and reliable, that are consistent and that measure what they're supposed to measure. And of course, match them with the criteria. Yeah, the tighter the match between your selected personality test and criteria, the more people go, oh, I can kind of see why they're asking these questions. Now, lastly, let's end with a couple practical considerations. First, once again, you got to go back to your job analysis class. Yeah, you got to ground it in what you know about the components of your job, the basic job, data, people, things. Next, be aware that persons and situations interact. Yeah, so measure traits that are relevant to situations of consequence. Yeah, remember our little framework of how traits matter most in weak situations, not in strong situations. When you are considering working with a test, ask for reliability and validity data. Try to get as much information as you can and be wary of just looking at the numbers. As you'll remember from the tutorial activity class, sometimes the numbers look good, but there are other problems with the measure that just make it not useful in your setting. And lastly, weigh up whether you can afford having a consultant do more one-on-one testing. Yeah, so having someone come in like a psychometrician to come in and administer and score the tests, or whether maybe just go computerized since it doesn't affect validity as much. Yeah, that is it, class, for this lecture on personality testing in staffing. Next, we will move on to interviews. Take it easy, class. Be well.